Okay.
No.
That's working. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're ready to start this event. First of all, as you know, we need to keep our masks on throughout the event. The candidates will as well, except when they're speaking, and I'll keep mine on except when I'm speaking as well. So my name is John Kafka. I'm the president of the North Saanich Residents Association, and I wish to welcome you to this event. I also wish to acknowledge that we're in the traditional territory of the West Saanich people, and we appreciate that. So the North Saanich Residents Association has been in existence for over 60 years. As many of you know who are residents of North Saanich, who are members, our mandate is to promote dialogue, citizens engagement, and to disseminate and share information. So having this event certainly fits our mandate, and we welcome you all here tonight, members and non-members alike. I'd like to particularly thank those of you who are members of the NSRA, because without your contribution of your annual dues of $15, we couldn't be holding this event. So we really appreciate those who have donated. Also, we wish to appreciate those who are actually watching the live stream as well, and who are Residents Association members of the association. Thank you. We will not be passing a hat around this year because of the COVID regulations. Normally we'll pass a hat and ask for donations from non-members, but we do have a basket on the way out, so if you happen to have some change and appreciate what goes on this evening, we welcome your donations to the NSRA, because it really helps us fund events such as this, and we would appreciate that. For those of you who live in North Saanich and who are not members, by the donation box, we also have information about the NSRA, how you can become a member. And for those of you who are new to North Saanich, who aren't members, your first year is free. So we encourage you to join us and receive the information that we share with our membership. I also like to acknowledge a few people here, some of the board of directors that assisted in putting on this event with myself. Jermaine Gaychamp, who is our longstanding director. Paige Gibson, who is our timekeeper here. Gordon Hardwick, who is in the back there working the audio and visual for this event. Steve Heddle, who is standing by the door, and Carolyn Stout, who is somewhere in the premises as well. There she is. So this event is being live streamed, and it's also being recorded, so people can watch it in the next few days. I'd also like to have a special thanks to the Saanich Presbyterian Church, particularly Reverend Erwin Cunningham and Darlene Crawford. Both of them have been very hospitable in allowing this event to go ahead with us. They've been great in helping us organize the tables, the audio visual, and just embracing the fact that we could hold this event when others may be more reluctant to do so. So we really appreciate the Saanich Presbyterian Church, their leadership and their congregation for allowing us to hold this event. Thank you. Yeah. So the fire exits are pretty clear. They're here, there, everywhere, basically. And the washrooms are, as you entered on the door, they're on your left-hand side as you enter, should you need to use the washrooms. And they're cleaned regularly as well, so you can feel safe using them. I'd like you all now to rise for our national anthem. Normally we'd have the Peninsula speakers, or we'd have someone singing here. Because of COVID, we're not. We ask you to keep your masks on and hum along. If you can do two things at once, you could actually hum and even think about how lucky we are that we actually can have this forum, and the importance of having respectful conversations and dialogue amongst the candidates. So I'd ask you to rise for O Canada and hum along, and thank you. I'm not going to start the humming. The recording's coming. That was awesome. Thank you. I now wish to introduce the 6 candidates from my left. We have David Busch from the Conservative Party of Canada. Well, I'll let you, maybe we can clap after each candidate, but actually during the event, probably best if we avoid clapping and booing, otherwise we're just going to take a long time. So, Currie from the Communist Party. David Hilderman from the People's Party of Canada. Elizabeth May from the Green Party of Canada. Moore-Arbour from the Liberal Party of Canada. And Sabina Singh from the New Democratic Party of Canada. So tonight's format is comprised of 4 segments. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. We'll do that in alphabetical order. Then they'll have a time to respond to 2 NSRA questions that we posed to them in advance. Then they will respond to 8 questions which our members provided to us via email. And then we'll have closing remarks. So we should be finished by 8:30, 8:45. So we will have a timer there, and Paige has got the timer there. If your time allotment goes up, a small bell will go off, or a bigger one will go if you don't listen after the small bell goes off. So we'll keep track of that for you. So first of all, we'll start off with David Busch, 2 minutes per candidate as an introduction.
Good evening. Whoa, that's loud. Okay, let's back up a little bit. Good evening, and thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to everyone who's watching from home. My background began as a published biochemist. I was doing research on cancer treatments. I realized very quickly that I preferred working with people, though, to looking at test tubes. I went back and got a 2nd degree in nursing. Worked as a critical care nurse for a number of years, and taught nursing for 2 different universities. While I enjoyed helping people, I wanted to do more to solve problems, so I went back and got a Juris Doctor of Law. And I've been working as a lawyer ever since. Helping people and solving problems is part of the reason why I put my name forward to be the next MP for Saanich Gulf Islands. The other part, the most important part to me, are my 2 sons. They're now 4 and 5. 2 years ago, I stood before you and asked for your vote. Then, I was deeply concerned about the path that Justin Trudeau was leading this country down. Today, I'm terrified, and that's why I'm back asking you again for your vote. Now, if you're happy with the direction this country's going, if you're okay with the ethical lapses, the broken promises, the record deficits, and the rising gun crime, if you're okay with that, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are your team. If you're okay with that, you can vote for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, who have been supporting him. Or you can vote for Anna May Paul and the Green Party. But if, like me, you're frustrated and you want to see a positive path going forwards, a solid plan to lead Canada out of the pandemic, you have one choice, and that's Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party of Canada, and me, your local candidate, David Busch. And that's my bell, so thank you.
Okay, and second we have Currie from the Communist Party of Canada.
Good. Hello everyone, my name is Currie and I'm running for the Communist Party of Canada. I'd like to start by acknowledging, as John did, that we're on the territory of the Saanich people. To me, this acknowledgement carries with it the responsibilities to earnestly endeavor to represent the positions of these peoples and to reflect what is known in the law as the honor of the crown, and I'll try to do that tonight. In George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's Lectures on the Philosophy of History, he writes, quote, "When liberty is mentioned, we must always be careful to observe whether it is not really the assertion of private interests which are thereby designated," end quote. The overwhelming majority of so-called freedoms in our free and democratic society are freedoms enjoyed predominantly by an affluent, white, settler colonial owning class. Young people, working people, indigenous people, LGBTQ2S+ people, black and brown people, vulnerable and marginalized people are not free in our society. They are not free of precarious employment. They are not free of abysmal labor conditions and practices. They are not free of the inadequacy of exorbitant, expensive housing. They are not free of the looming threat of climate change and extreme weather events. On issue after issue, the interests of the affluent white settler colonial owning class in society differs from those of the working class, indigenous people, and vulnerable and marginalized people. I am running to offer up a real anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, pro-indigenous people's alternative. Thank you very much.
We have one shared microphone here. Thanks, Doc. Dave Hilderman from the People's Party of Canada.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Hilderman, your People's Party of Canada candidate. I'm honored to be addressing you here tonight. You, the residents of the Saanich Gulf Islands, care about the planet, and you also care about democracy. We have the highest voter turnout per capita in Canada here. I feel extremely fortunate to have been able to live here with my family for the last 21 years. We have such an amazingly beautiful place to live and such wonderful people here. I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, things have to make sense to me. The math has to work. Things have to add up. Over the last 18 months, one of the things that hasn't added up is why our government has ignored international studies that show a reduction in hospitalization and death from COVID through the use of ivermectin. It is being used as a standard early treatment in many nations, including Mexico. Why not save lives any way possible? Here's another one. Dr. Francis Christian, a 20-year practicing surgeon and clinical professor at the University of Saskatchewan, was fired from all teaching and leadership roles for having a press conference regarding the lack of information being given to parents about the risks of COVID vaccine in children. So what could this man possibly stand to gain for doing this press conference? Nothing. He was willing to risk his career to do what he thought was right. Now he is no longer employed by the university. What's going on? That sure doesn't make sense. And another one. In Canada, in the 12 months of 2019, accidents killed 22 times more children than 18 months of COVID. Suicide, 14 times more. Traffic accidents, 10 times more. The flu and pneumonia, nearly twice as many as COVID. So if COVID is such a relatively minor risk in children, why the push to have them vaccinated? I'm sure that the scientists that developed the COVID vaccines have not also invented time travel, so they can't know what will happen in 2, 3, or 5 years after taking the vaccine. Why are we giving these risks to our children? The PPC party is all about common sense.
Next, we have Elizabeth May from Green Party.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to start by acknowledging we're on the traditional territory of Saanich people, and I raise my hands to you. It's an honor to be with you, and it's an extreme honor, and one that I continue to be overwhelmed by the honor that I've served as your Member of Parliament at all, much less that I've served as your Member of Parliament since 2011. It's been the most extraordinary experience of my life, and it continues to be vastly rewarding work. I want to thank the North Saanich Residents Association for creating this opportunity to have an in-person debate. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think we've had the strangest life experience through COVID pandemic. We've both been isolated and together. Together, we've shared an isolation. I really miss seeing human faces and not just on Zoom. So it is lovely to see so many friends. In the time I have as an opening statement, I just want to say how much I love being a parliamentarian, how much I love Canada, and how much I believe that democracy works. I'll also add that while I love being a parliamentarian, I don't like politics very much. I particularly don't like elections. I don't think it brings out the best in us. And I have to say that the pandemic did bring out the best of us in Parliament. I've never worked so hard in my life, and I've never seen so many civil servants working so hard. I've never seen us as MPs, regardless of what party we were in, rolling up our sleeves and working together. I could tell you anecdotes, but I'll use up all my time. The issue that drives me, as you know, is that we must address the climate emergency as an emergency. We now have a growing consensus that we have to do something, And some people seem to think if you're willing to do anything, it's all more or less the same. It's not. As Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire. We have to act like it. We have to move decisively, and we need to mean that we understand what emergency is.
Thank you. And Sherri Moore-Arbour from the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening to talk about the issues that matter. And I'm very keen to participate and talk about the Liberal platform and various, and to answer your questions. My name is Sherri Moore-Arbour. I'm the federal Liberal candidate for Saanich Gulf Islands. My family and I live on Galliano Island, and where I'm parent to 2 teens. My husband, Al, is a vice principal. I run a national public affairs firm, and our public affairs firm is focused on building healthier, more inclusive communities. My role in our firm is the strategic communication lead. We've worked to support the BC Centre for Disease Control and the public health response to COVID-19. And we support Canadian public education across the country in building more inclusive policies so that students can succeed. I'm a former locally elected school board trustee and vice chair of a school board, and while that is a very far distance from the House of Commons in the minds of some, it really taught me how to work within constraints when making decisions that impact outcomes, and I think that that's a really valuable training ground politically. And I will say that my family is dedicated to service, and in my case, we've been very involved with the Lions Clubs movement since 2008. I put my name forward. I was asked to run and deliberated based on my commitment to the issues that matter in my community and my commitment to achieving the goals that I think will benefit my community of Saanich Gulf Islands.
So, hello everyone. I was here again 2 years ago. It's nice to see you again. My name is Sabina Singh, Dr. Sabina Singh. I am your candidate for the NDP for the 44th general election. I'm a mother, an academic, a dance artist, a dog mother, and a wife. I have a PhD in political science, which I earned from the University of Victoria. My particular skills are in global politics and international relations. In 2019, I have 2 beautiful children, and in 2019, my youngest daughter graduated high school, and I married the Venerable Alistair McCollum of the Anglican Church of Canada. He's an archdeacon, and he gave me the support and strength to put my name forward to run for politics. My kids had graduated, and I had a PhD, and I thought I can be of service to my party, and I'm very proud of what they have been doing, and I want to join them. I, like NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, was born Sikhi. I'm born to the Sikhi culture. So my great-grandparents changed our last name to Singh a long time ago because we believe in equity. One of the things that we also believe in our culture is service, and service to one's community. We call it seva. And so I want to be part of that culture of providing service to my community and to working to make a better Canada for my children, for our grandchildren, and for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the second segment of our evening, and those are 2 questions that the candidates received in advance from the NSRA. And the order of response will be Dave Hilderman, Sabina, David Busch, Sherri, Doc, and Elizabeth, if you don't mind me calling you on a first name basis.
Just clarify, is 1.5 minutes for both or
It's 1 minute and 30 seconds for each response to this question.
Both questions?
No, for this one question. So the one question for 1 minute and 30 seconds, and Dave Hilderman will respond first, and this is the question that you've all seen in advance, is, according to Stats Canada, Canada reported a deficit of $314 billion in fiscal 2020-21. The total debt of the federal government is expected to exceed $2 trillion by 2024-25. And this projected spending does not include new promises proposed by the parties thus far in the campaign. What is your position on deficit spending, and how will we manage the deficit in the medium to long term? David. You can remove your mask if you wish to.
All major parties during this election seem to be trying to have a contest to see who can promise the most spending. All of them except for Maxime Bernier. I don't know if you've been able to pay attention to anything that he's been saying, because the main media doesn't seem to be covering him very much. But we have a different objective here. We want to find how can we reduce spending. The debt that our country has right now is going to be is staggering, and my children have to pay for this. All your children will. It's going to be on their shoulders for generations. We, the People's Party of Canada, want to reduce this deficit as quickly as we can. In our platform, we want to reduce the deficit to nothing in the first mandate. So that is something that's completely different from all the other parties. The other parties, I'm shocked. I got surveys on Facebook, and they come and they say, what do you want us to spend on? What are the other things that you want? What do you want? What do you want? More spending, more spending, more spending. We can't afford this. We put so much debt. It's like there was a world war going on or something that we spent that much money. And we could have done things differently. We could have followed the Great Barrington Declaration during this pandemic. So I think that's enough for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Sabina?
Thank you. Well, first of all, this has been such a difficult year and a half, 18 months for all of us. It's really nice to be able to be in person and see people in person. Yes, our debt is growing, our deficit payments are growing, and we at the NDP do want to bring that down because we know how it will affect future generations. But at the same time, we are facing extremely bold problems right now, and we need bold solutions for them. One of the ways that the NDP wants to be able to address some of these major problems, whether it be climate, disease, fires, you name it, is to increase taxes, have a more fair tax system, and make people who made huge profits last year pay their fair share, so we can use it to regenerate Canada and the services that Canadians need. We know that the services have been cut and they need to be restored. So it will cost us money, but it's money worth spending on our communities so that we can be prepared for what's coming in the future. We have the money, we just need to pay, we need to get it from the people who have it. Thank you.
Thank you. David Busch.
Thank you. In 2015, we handed over a balanced budget to the Trudeau Liberals. I think you all remember this promise. Tiny, modest deficits, $10 billion for a few years, balanced budget after 4. It's important to run your finances as a government as you would your house. You save during the good times, so you have a nest egg during the bad times. I am deeply disturbed by the size of this deficit, and it keeps climbing. At $2 trillion, the interest on that is going to be in the range of $70 billion a year. Now, people often say, as a conservative, you only care about the money. No. I care about our social services. I care about our health care. I care about the inspectors that make sure our roads and bridges are safe. What do they all have in common? They all cost money. We would love to be able to balance the budget in 4 years. But the only way we'd be able to do that is by massive slashes to federal spending, such as the Liberals did under Jean Chrétien to healthcare, pulling $24 billion out of it in the early 90s. That's unacceptable because we need our social services now more than ever. Our plan is to have it balanced within 10 years. because that is achievable without having to turn around and run the economy straight into the ground. The alternative is, at this point, the PBO is saying the budget won't be balanced until 2070. My kids will be 55 years old then. I don't want them to have to wait until they're 55 to see a balanced budget.
Thank you. Sherri, Moore-Arbour.
There is no question that the size of the recent deficit budget is a startling figure, and there is also no question that the scope of response that was required to address the pandemic and the economic pressures that that created was also startling and unprecedented. The money that was spent investing in Canadians so that Canadians could maintain roofs over their heads, food on their table, and to keep businesses open. And the reason why that's critically and why that's responsible in terms of an investment is that it keeps our businesses ready for an economic recovery once the COVID resolution brings us to a point of businesses being ready to open doors again. I don't think that I don't think it's economically wise or responsible to allow businesses and to allow people to lose their homes and businesses to go out of business when so clearly they've been struggling. There is no question that our government has had a history of balancing budgets in the past, as Mr. Busch mentioned, when Mr. Martin handed the reins of government over to Mr. Harper. I do recall that there were surpluses that were given at that time.
Thank you. Doc Currie.
The issue is not how much money is created by monetary institutions, liquidity, but rather the state of the real economy, the forces of production and exchange in Canada, which have been allowed to wither and decay and atrophy under successive neoliberal governments. When there's a capitalist crisis, when there's an overproduction crisis, monetary institutions pump trillions of dollars into the system. In one day, the US Federal Reserve pumped $1 trillion of liquidity into the system. If you picture dead, desecrated, rocky soil, it doesn't matter how much liquidity, doesn't matter how much water you shoot at it, it's not going to produce crops that you can eat. You need to have a development of the real economy. And what the Liberals are proposing, what other parties are proposing, is an increase in liquidity, but we've allowed our real economy to atrophy over successive decades. And so it doesn't have the desired effect. There's a diminishing returns. What the Communist Party of Canada proposes is nationalization of critical sectors, telecommunications, energy, and the rebuilding of the real economy, such that if there is a need for increased liquidity, it actually achieves the purposes that it set out to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Elizabeth May.
Thank you. I think one of the things for Canadians to know about how much money was spent was that with the exception of my friends Doc Currie in the Communist Party and David in the People's Party, all the parties, because they don't have seats in Parliament, all of the members of Parliament acted unanimously to approve an extraordinary amount of spending because we were in an extraordinary crisis. So $80 billion of spending was approved, not just with all the political parties agreeing. Truly unanimous consent was required, which means every individual MP agreed. I looked to the Parliamentary Budget Office, which, by the way, was a good thing done under Stephen Harper. We have an independent group of economic experts to advise parliamentarians. And the advice sometimes surprises me. For instance, we now know that our debt to GDP ratio, which is the key indicator, isn't as bad today as it was in the early 90s. We do have to get rid of the deficit. I have no doubt about that. PBO thinks that with an economic recovery, much of it will disappear as long as what the government has chosen to do is temporary spending, as in a war, and not permanent spending. We also know that we have a significant commonality with every other industrialized country that did what we did together. I think we should find the solutions to global debt together. And I think I'm out of time.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the second question, and that will be in the order of David Busch, Doc Currie, Elizabeth May, Sherri Moore-Arbour, Sabina, Singh, and then Dave Hilderman. And the second question, which we posed and provided to the candidates in advance, reads, if you were elected and the Prime Minister came to you and said, I want to spend $5 million in your riding and in North Saanich in particular, what would you propose to spend the funds on and why? David Busch.
What can you get for $5 million? Not as much these days as you could a few years ago.
Exactly. That's why we increased it from $2 million last time to 5 million.
Thank you for that. One of the things I enjoy about being the candidate is going around and talking to all the voters in the riding and hearing what are their concerns, what are their stories like, and what can you do as an MP to help them. One of the issues that I heard somewhat uniquely to North Saanich was the need for another marina and a boat launch. One of the reasons why I'm thinking this would be where I'd be looking to target some money as opposed to other areas is I want to make sure you can get a project done from start to finish. Now, I was looking at areas that were being considered, and well, one of the prices over the last couple of years for the property went from $18 million to through the stratosphere. But fortunately, there was another location by the Institute of Ocean Sciences on the southern end, and that's on federal land. So in addition to that $5 million, I'd be asking for a long-term lease or the turnover of that land for a marina. This also fits in with part of our platform for better management and more funding for local marinas because they form part of the lifeblood and the economy of the local area. So I'd be looking to put a small marina and boat launch in on the southern tip of the federal land by the Institute of Ocean Sciences.
Thank you. And Doc?
Yeah, $5 million isn't a great amount of money. You could maybe get a house in Dean Park for $5 million. But I would spend it potentially on expanding transit infrastructure for the peninsula, instituting night bus service. The demographic in this room might not make as much use out of that as some of the younger folks on the peninsula, but for those who don't have cars, it would be a great benefit. Broader for the Gulf Islands, increased internet telecommunication service for the Gulf Islands. And as I say, $5 million is $5 million, but we need public investment by orders of magnitude larger than that to bring us into line with the best of the G7 nations and to make us a competitive society and nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next up is Elizabeth May.
Yeah, I got interested in what David was proposing because this is a really challenging question. Again, $5 billion isn't a lot. The problem with that idea, which is otherwise great, is that that's actually Sachem First Nations land and they have a proprietary right to the area for that wharf. And the airport authority doesn't like the idea of putting a wharf down there because it's on their runway strip. So I've been working on this for a while with the mayor of North Saanich and others to try to find a good place. But I agree with you, that would be a good place to put the money if we find the right place for the wharf. $5 million. I talked to some friends. I talked to an architect developer in North Saanich, and she said, well, a priority would be affordable housing, but what can you do with $5 million? The site will take $1 million. What can we do that would make a difference? I talked to some community member groups who said, well, there's so much work being done in North Saanich by the community groups, looking at sustainability, looking at a zero carbon and a resilient future. We could put some money there into planning for greater being prepared for adaptation to sea level rise, doing more to be prepared around drought, doing more with water infrastructure. I've been working really hard to try to get, because it takes a lot, to get a visitor center for the Gulf Islands National Park. We're the only place that has a national park reachable to Southern Canadians and no place for them to come and learn about the ecosystem, learn about the Indigenous history and culture of this place. But the place I've been trying to get in the federal budget, I pitched it really hard, and the mayor can tell you, was $28 million, just to try to get a land and a house that would suit a highway and marine access. It's a great idea. I love the question.
Thank you. Sherri, Moore-Arbour.
This answer represents a confluence of both my experience in local politics and the work that I do now. $5 million may not be a lot of money to some, but $5 million can really help produce or realize two important community assets that currently are struggling and looking for funding. One of them being the Parkland High School competitive track facilities, which would fit well within that envelope, but otherwise are challenging to meet with struggling school board budgets, as I'm sure you're aware. This is much more than a facility for schools. This is a community asset where communities actually have an opportunity to be active, be out, and improve their health and connectedness. And of course, that's outdoors. The second that would also fit within this $5 million envelope is improving or introducing artificial turf at Blue Heron Park, which would again lean into this notion of active living, kids, community, and fitness coming together in sort of a lens of public health. So while $5 million may not achieve all that we want, there certainly are projects that could be meaningfully supported with this money.
Hi, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate that you gave more money for us to think about this time around, because I think it was $1 million last time, and it was really, that's not enough. But anyway, this is a great question, and I'm going to just, I know that it's there to ask us, what we prioritize, and I think it would be great to say transit, marinas, all kinds of things that we could use. And to me, this would be an amazing place for an Indigenous arts center, and all kinds of things. But what I want to do, and what we're doing at the Center for World Indigenous Studies, implementing UNDRIP worldwide, is trying to create a table. So a new table, because as you know, colonialism was very hierarchical, very top down. So we don't have a lot of places for people to speak to each other. So I would make it my goal as an MP to make sure the provinces, the nations, the municipalities, the territories, perhaps nonprofit organizations, to get together and say, how do you want to spend that $5 million? Where do you think it will go? But just creating that dialogue and that space where that dialogue can happen will create a lot of changes for the area, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm really new at politics, and I have not had much time to run around and talk to people about this kind of stuff. I like the marina idea. I like a lot of the ideas. I would have to, if someone did that, I would have to spend a lot of time talking to people and talking to different groups to find out what to do. So I don't know what I would do with it. It's my honest answer. Sorry.
All right, thank you. Thank you to all the candidates for that. So now we're going to move on to the third segment, and these are questions that were provided to us by our membership by email. We received probably close to 25. We can only ask 8. And so the format tonight is that each candidate will have an opportunity to respond to the 8 questions. However, the 2 candidates which I identify at the outset will have 1 minute, and the other remaining 4 candidates will have 30 seconds to respond. So the first, and generally I'll read the question over once, except this first one and maybe another which is a bit longer, so I'll read it over twice. And I'll give you a heads up about the order right now. The order would be for 1 minute and 30 for 1 minute, would be David Busch and David Hilderman. And then that will be, the 30 seconds will be followed in this order: Elizabeth May, Sabina Singh, Sherri Moore-Arbour, and then Doc Currie. And it's sort of ironic. This topic was already covered by you, David, already, but you can elaborate on it. There's only one public boat launch in the Saanich Peninsula in Sydney. It is often overcrowded and exposed to high winds. Recent polling by the NSRA shows strong support for an alternative safe location on the north and west side of the peninsula. Locations have been identified at Queens Mary's Bay and on federal and airport lands near the Institute for Ocean Sciences in Pat Bay. If elected, what will you do to resolve the issue of a lack of a safe public boat launch facilities on the peninsula?
Well, it's nice to see all the door knocking I was doing was paying off, and they were actually coming out with real and serious problems that they're concerned about. The Queens Mary Bay, that was the first property I was talking about. About 3 years ago, I think it was listed for about $18 million, and the price has gone through the roof to the point where it's horrifically expensive. I'd be looking more at the southern one, and this goes into a second area. We need to have the treaties across the board. Wherever there's bans without them, we need to resolve that. Also on that front, we need to make sure we honor the existing treaties, because it makes it really hard for us to move forwards together when you have these underlying issues that are unresolved. My focus would be to work with the federal government, work with the band, and come up with a solution to try for that marina on the federal property south of the Institute of Ocean Sciences.
Okay, thank you. And Dave Hilderman, 1 minute for you as well.
1 minute is too long for me on this. I actually don't know what I would do with that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Elizabeth May, for 30 seconds.
I have to apologize that I keep using my phone as my stopwatch. But anyway, quickly, isn't it amazing that we touched on this already? I've been working on this for a while. It's really clear that it is needed. I've met with many of the local residents who've been looking at it. That's why I also have been looking at the property on Land's End Road. And again, thinking it might be an ideal place to put a visitor center for the national park. That could help us with the commercial wharf as well. And by having multiple uses, we can hit multiple pockets for cash. It is a priority. I'll keep working on it. I hope.
Next will be Sabina.
Thank you. I'm definitely aware that this is a priority in this area and it has to be worked on. I appreciate all the work that you've done on it, Elizabeth, and I would continue to do that as your MP and try and make sure we have, again, a table with Indigenous nations and everyone around to make sure that we can make the right decisions.
Thank you. And Sherri, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I also understand that this is a major issue in the community and that the recent request that went into the Minister of the Environment for consideration, I think needs his reconsideration. I think that the decision to not approve the launch that was presented as an option is something worth pursuing still.
Thank you. And Doc.
I'm not familiar with the issue enough to really weigh in one way or the other, but if it touches on Indigenous issues, I don't think that we should take an instrumental approach. We should really have deep consultation. If there's an issue with development of additional boat launch, then we should be very sensitive to that, because too often settler colonial society just treats Indigenous rights and Indigenous claims as a means to an end, as important as a boat launch may be.
Thank you.
There's no rapid responses, are there?
I'm sorry?
She wants to say something.
No, I don't think we have an opportunity for that. But
Personal anecdote.
no, okay, all right. The next question is the 2 minute-long responses will be for Sherri, Moore-Arbour, and for Currie. And then will be followed for 30-second responses by Sabina, Elizabeth May, David Hilderman, and then David Busch. And the question is, where do you stand on the issue of support for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation? And so we start off with Doc on that one. You're the first.
Great. I would love to talk about this. So the CBC is a cherished national institution, and it doesn't receive nearly the amount of funding that it needs to receive. However, the CBC represents by and large, an affluent, white, settler colonial perspective, and this has been highlighted by the staff at the CBC. There was issues with the popular show Kim's Convenience, where subsequent to its broadcast, writers and actors said, hey, we were being written lines that were very offensive to us. You know, they made light of Japanese colonialism, of Korean people, and they were forced to act out and play this, and it's all the plaything of a monopolistic elite at the top of the CBC. And across the board, I'm sure that the Conservatives here take umbrage with this, certainly that we do. We would like to see increased funding, but also tied to mandates for representation, ideological representation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sherri Moore-Arbour for a minute response.
I don't think I need a minute. I will say that I am absolutely passionately supportive of the CBC and, if anything, improve funding for the CBC in order for it to run a robust digital program, which increasingly is how younger Canadians are connecting with the content in an ad-free environment. So I think that that's really critical. I will, as an Indigenous woman and the only Indigenous candidate on the stage, I will say that it is something that I think is a good point, that we would also look to stations like APTN for funding as well, that there is undoubtedly a need for that too.
Thank you. And Sabina?
Yes, I just want to agree with Sherri that the Aboriginal People's Television Network should also be funded like the CBC is. And with Doc, that we need representation through the CBC that reflects Canada. It is why I'm running, as I'm every box that you want. I also have a disability. It's invisible, but I'm one of the disabled candidates in this election. So I'm a woman, and I'm from India and from Canada and all that stuff. So it's important to have that representation. Thank you.
And then Elizabeth, May.
Thanks. I'm a huge supporter of the CBC, aussi Radio-Canada. We need public broadcasting. We don't have the portion of our GDP on a percentage basis. The BBC in the UK is much better funded. We should never have allowed commercialization to creep into the CBC. When they started putting Wheel of Fortune on TV, I thought this is the beginning of the end. Let CTV do that. Let them get the advertising revenue. Let Global get that. Let's fund the CBC and make sure we get good journalism that isn't about scandals and celebrities.
Thank you. And Dave Hilderman.
If the CBC was truly giving completely unbiased news about everything that was going on in this country, I would be fine with continuing funding with it. And maybe funding is fine, but there have been protests about the way the government is doing lockdowns and things, and how it's really drastically destroying people's lives and the pain that people are experiencing. I'm not hearing the CBC reporting on this at all. I've seen this. I've seen people crying, people like afraid that they're going to lose their livelihood. People are afraid right now, and we're not seeing that in the media. So I think there's a problem with the CBC.
Thank you. And David Busch.
Next time, maybe a little less money and a little bit more time for the answers would be nice. The CBC was created by the Conservative Party of Canada. I personally enjoy listening to it. I have the radio going in the background while I'm working, and it performs a very important role. That said, I think we need to take a look at its mandate, make sure it's properly funded, and make sure that it's not overlapping in the areas where the private television companies should be, but rather focusing on its mandate of promoting Canadian culture.
Thank you. So the third question we've selected from members of our organization will be directed first of all to David Hilderman and then Sabina Singh. and that will be followed by 30-second responses by David Busch, Currie, Sherri, Moore-Arbour, and Elizabeth May in that order. The question is, the federal government implemented a number of initiatives to respond to the pandemic. In your opinion, this is a three-part question, what was the best thing they did? What was the worst thing they did? And thirdly, moving forward, what initiatives should the federal government adopt to deal with the current situation? So in your opinion, what was the best thing they did? What was the worst thing they did? And what initiatives would you propose moving forward? And David Hilderman, you're first for a minute opportunity, followed by Sabina for a minute.
The best thing that the BC government did with the pandemic is initially, Bonnie Henry said, we need to be kind. Now, there was 3 words, but there were no laws. The worst thing was when my daughter and her boyfriend came at Christmas Eve with presents with them, and they just were going to drop them off at my house because it was illegal. It was breaking health regulations for them to come into my house. It broke my heart. Making laws like that just does not seem right. It's tragic. I also think that our government could have done something more like Sweden, like South Dakota, like Florida. The harm to our culture and to our people, to our young people have like given up. Think about it when you're 5 years old. What was 1 year of your life? 18 months. Now they've had to have, the child has changed. So what would they do going forward? I think I would end lockdowns and I would make vaccine passports illegal because medical. Yeah.
Thank you. And a minute response opportunity for Sabina.
You? Okay, for me, the best thing that the Canadian government, the Canadian federal government did during the pandemic was listen to the NDP. That was an easy question. So we fought with all of Parliament, but we fought hard for a lot of the advances that Canadians got during the pandemic, especially workers, students, long-term care workers. The worst thing they did, well, there's a few. The worst thing they did was not have vaccines produced in Canada. They voted against pharmacare. So there's a number of things I could say that were the worst that would really have helped Canadians. Going forward, I'd support Canadians, fight for you.
Thank you. Then we will move on to David Busch. And David Hilderman, can you just mask? Thanks.
The best work on the pandemic came from the provincial health officers. They did the heavy lifting. The worst came from the federal government, from telling people initially the masks make no difference. That was a problem because people wound up not believing the government later on. A recent study looking at vaccine hesitancy found that there's only 13% of the populations that are saying no, which is 6, or 7% saying we're hesitant. Why are they hesitant? Because they don't trust the federal government anymore. And I'm not surprised because we've turned this into a wedge issue. We got to stop talking about rights and start talking about the facts and what is important, which is people's health.
Thank you. And Doc Currie.
Okay, so the best was the CERB. People were out of work, needed supports, got supports, great. Could have been more robust, but sure, great, fine, whatever. The worst was the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. With respect, the NDP marched hand in hand with the Liberals to gin up support for the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. It has resulted in a massive transfer of public goods into private hands with no strings attached. And now they're complaining about it, oh, big dividends, but that was inevitable because that's the way it was structured.
Thank you. Sherri.
Thanks for the question. I think that the best thing that happened undeniably is really how we are all sitting here tonight together in person, and that is the procurement of the vaccines, a variety, Canada securing a variety of vaccine doses before we clearly understood which ones would be the ones we would need. So we had an abundance secured that were ready to be deployed to the province. I think the worst thing was maybe, each province having its own provincial system, communicating degrees of risk. Communication knows no geographic boundaries, and ultimately people found that a little difficult.
Thank you. And Elizabeth May.
Really hard to do this in 30 seconds. The economic supports to Canadians were delivered fast. People worked really hard to do that. The worst was one thing that happened before the pandemic was cutting the budget of the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, inexplicably leaving us without the radar we needed to see COVID coming. I agree with Sherri, we needed better coordination between provincial health officers and the feds. And lastly, we need, going forward, to get vaccines to the developing world, and fast.
Thank you. The fourth question, and this is directed first to Elizabeth May to respond to, and to Doc Currie. Each will have a minute, and that will be followed by Sherri, and then David Busch, David Hilderman, and finally Sherri Moore-Arbour. The question is, how would you balance the need for trade with China versus Canada's need to promote human rights? How would you balance the need for trade with China versus Canada's need to promote human rights? And that is Elizabeth May first, followed by Doc.
This is a very difficult question, and a lot of people don't know this, that under the Stephen Harper administration, we've already given away the store to the People's Republic of China through the secret passage in a secret cabinet meeting of the foreign investment protection agreement with China. Means that if we change any of our regulations or laws that hurt Chinese interests, government interests, Communist Party interests, they can bring secret arbitration cases against us, and we're locked into that for another 30 years or so. We should never stand down from defending human rights. The Uyghur Muslims are facing genocide. The Falun Dafa, and when we look at what's happening to our Canadians basically kidnapped in retaliation for Meng Wanzhou, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, need full support from Canada, and we need to pull our allies in to say we want to work with China, but we defend human rights.
Thank you. And Doc Currie.
Our party wants to have a good relationship with China, not belligerent relationship with China. We don't want to be part of the jingoistic saber rattling of U.S. empire against China. Ms. May has brought up the accusation of genocide. Those claims have been rejected at the UN. It is a small coterie of states around the U.S. empire which makes these claims. They have not been successful at the UN. And the same people who promote these claims are the same people who voted against a resolution condemning Nazism, the same people who voted against the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, and the same people who regularly vote against the recognition of Palestine. It is a small coterie of states who want a belligerent relationship with China and are manufacturing consent for that belligerent relationship, which we reject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Sherri Moore-Arbour.
Thank you for that. I think human rights first, for sure, and we as a Liberal government are committed to that, in the order of priority being human rights first, economic cooperation and economic relationships in a close second, obviously wanting to continue to work with such an economic superpower, recognizing the inequity in the relationship as well, but human rights must be the priority.
Thank you. David Busch.
We need to be trading with like-minded countries. We need to pull away from China until such time as they start recognizing international norms and human rights. That requires trading more with Australia, with New Zealand, with the United Kingdom, with Europe, other democratic countries that share our ideals, respect for international law, and above all, respect for human rights.
Thank you. And David Hilderman.
Yeah, human rights. Human rights are more important than trade. We have to stand up to China. One of the things that's happening, the net zero initiatives in Canada is causing energy prices to go through the roof. It's making production of everything more expensive here, so everything ends up getting made in China. Everything is cheaper to do there because they don't have carbon costs, increased carbon costs. We need to have cheap energy to be competitive with China.
Thank you. And finally, Sabina.
This is an issue that goes throughout the world. China has been developing countries across the globe, and they're all facing very similar issues. On the one hand, they're doing it in a way that we wouldn't do it, but they're also creating situations of vast inequality. We have Uyghurs, Tibetans, a number of people on my calls with the Center for World Indigenous Studies, and they do exist, and they are having troubles, and we need to help them and prioritize human rights.
Thank you. The fifth question, and it will be answered firstly and in a minute by Sherri Moore-Arbour and David Busch, followed by Elizabeth May, Sabina Singh, David Hilderman, and then Currie. The question is, if your party is elected as Prime Minister, if your party leader is elected as Prime Minister, and if, in your judgment, a majority of your constituents support a position contrary to that of the Prime Minister, and you agree with that position, would you have the courage to vote against your party in power? I'll read that again for a little bit twister. If your party leader is elected as Prime Minister, and if in your judgment a majority of your constituents support a position contrary to that of the Prime Minister, and you agree with that position, would you have the courage to vote against the party in power?
I believe that I was called on first. Yes?
You are.
Okay,
thank
great. This is a great question and an easy question for me to answer. I'm passionate about representational democracy. I'm passionate about constituency engagement, and there is a very glaring precedent in our party that's fairly recent. So in terms of me tapping into my personal courage based on the priorities of my riding, absolutely, that is something that I would feel very confident doing, because I think that fundamentally that is the job of a member of parliament, to represent the views of your constituency and carry those views effectively back to Ottawa and not the other way around. And I would just raise Terry Beach's name as somebody who was experiencing, obviously a huge amount of pressure from within his riding, and did just that.
Thank you. David Busch.
Our party's position is that the MPs are to represent their constituents first. So long as it's not a confidence motion such as the budget that will cause the government to topple, we are expected to vote for our constituents. So yes, I would have the courage to do it, because that is why I am running. I am not running because the weather in Ottawa is great. I've been there in January. It isn't. I'm not going there for the paycheck. I have a great job that I love, and I'm certainly not going there to get away from my kids, because I love my kids and my family, and I want to be spending more time. I'm doing this for them, and I want them to be able to look up to me as a man of integrity, a man who will put the interests of them and his voters first.
And actually, I just ask you to remind you to refrain from clapping, because otherwise it's going to get into a popularity contest, and we don't want to go there right now until Election Day. Elizabeth May.
Dead easy question for me. I belong to and represent in Parliament under the Green Party banner. It's the only party that doesn't believe in whipped votes. It would require no courage. It's what's expected of a Green member of Parliament, to vote the way their conscience and their constituents direct them to do. I can tell you from experience, I've seen every single Liberal and NDP MP, even when they hated the idea, every one of them toed the line and voted to bomb Libya, just as every single Conservative MP, when told to do so, voted that asbestos is safe.
Thank you. And we would now go on to Sabina.
We have an interesting government, 338 seats, and obviously we have to decide when we make votes how they're going to affect the government and affect the people of Canada. But I would expect that all of you would also balance that. So if the issue was really important, of course, I would bring it to Jagmeet Singh. I would expect him to listen to me, but you're the priority and you're always first. And no matter how you vote, I will listen to the constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hilderman, followed by Doc Currie.
I would listen to my constituents. I think it would be a complicated thing. Like I don't know. Maybe the thing that it impacts some other part of the country drastically, and it doesn't benefit us. If that's something like that, and I feel that it's best for the country and it's best for the overall good of Canada, even if my constituents really didn't want things that way, I think I would probably have to go with the party. But if it's something that's not that way, I'd have to use my own judgment, and I'd have to look at this. I'm definitely going to listen to my constituents, though, and bring those views to Parliament.
Thank you. And finally, thank you. We read the time there, Doc. Thanks.
If it's a matter of conscience, I would feel comfortable voting my conscience, structurally, formally, in the abstract, but I just have to say that the leader of my party is Liz Rowley, and like another Liz on the stage, she is a tough, principled lady, and she was fighting the KKK when I was in elementary school, so I would defer to her on a great many things, and I have a lot to learn from her. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The fifth of the 8 questions is going to be asked to Sabina Singh first, followed by Dave Hilderman for the 1 minute, and then followed in order by Doc Currie, Sheila Moore-Arbour, Elizabeth May, and then finally David Busch. The question is, do you support Indigenous communities in pursuing their economic development endeavors, even if these endeavors are based in resource extraction, such as logging and/or production and transportation of fossil fuels? Do you support Indigenous communities in pursuing their economic development endeavors, even if these endeavors are based in resource extraction, such as logging and/or production and transportation of fossil fuels? And Sabina Singh is first, followed by David Hilderman.
So our party has a huge amount to invest in Indigenous-led development and Indigenous-led planning. This issue is extremely important to us and to me personally from what I do across the world. So the answer is yes. I don't know that someone gets to say even if it is this or not. I think that Indigenous people across the globe, well, 80% of the biodiversity left in the world is on Indigenous territory. So I think that in terms of stewarding the land and knowing what to do and how to move forward, we have a lot to learn in that regard. And we, as settler culture, all over the world, we really need to learn a lot from Indigenous people, and we can, and we will benefit from sharing knowledge together, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dave Hilderman.
I would definitely support Indigenous people doing resource extraction on their lands and the fossil fuels. It's the people, they're living in these remote areas. It's the opportunity, it's the way that they can be prosperous. It's the way they can have jobs. They can feel good about themselves. They can have dignity. Having a job gives a person dignity. When there's not anything to do, it's really tough for them. So I support that. I also know that there are some really special places in Canada in biodiversity and things like that. We need to work with them to figure out ways that they can utilize that as a resource so they can also make jobs and be economically prosperous.
Thank you. And Doc.
I think it's really important to be specific about who the Indigenous peoples are. the landmark case of Delgamuukw versus BC, 1997, confirmed that it is the kinship structures, the clans and the family kinship structures that have title over the land. And the Indian Act is a colonial, frankly racist, settler colonial imposition. And so it's a bit hypocritical to say, oh, well, we have these resource sharing agreements with these bands. They just have authority over the reserves. That's not necessarily free, prior, and informed consent as with UNDRIP.
Thank you. And then that is followed by Sherri, and then Elizabeth, and then David.
I just want to start by respectfully saying that even the structure of the question is quite a colonial structure. It's absolutely not up to me to support or not support. I think that it is up to the First Nation to make decisions that impact their territory. And I will just highlight that, Indigenous resource management is a multi-generational approach, and it's when the settlers arrived and the colonial structures were developed that we started to have the challenges that we're seeing today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Doc just said, so there you go. What are called the forest and range consultation agreements. We right now have a flaming controversy with more people arrested in nonviolent civil disobedience at Fairy Creek than at any period more than Clayoquot Sound. And the Pacheedaht First Nation has been told that somehow, and we hear in the media that they want this logging, but the Forest and Range Consultation Agreement that they were forced to sign by the BC government was extremely rights denying. As Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says, it puts a brown face on accelerated old growth logging, and I totally reject that.
Thank you. David Busch.
Recognizing Indigenous rights and the path to reconciliations means accepting their decisions even when you disagree with them. As the MP, I would fully support their decisions. And if they want, and doing resource extraction, it's a means for them to help get their band members out of poverty and have a better life, and I will fully support them in that.
Thank you. Question 7 of 8 is related to climate change. We have, first of all, Sabina Singh for 1 minute, followed by Elizabeth May for 1 minute. And then in order for 30 seconds, we'll have Dave Hilderman, David Busch, Doc Currie, and Sherri Moore-Arbour. So the question is, climate change action is supported by many people until they realize it may cost them money. Do you have a plan that includes getting buy-in from the public? Climate action change is supported by many people until they realize it may cost them money. Do you have a plan that includes getting a buy-in from the public? And we started off with Sabina.
I think that's very important that we need to get a buy-in from the public. And everybody needs to understand that we need to fight the climate emergency like we want to win. This is a global issue, a global problem, and we all want a planet to live on, no matter what country you live in. So working together, we can fight the climate emergency. How we get buy-in? We do it together. We leave no one behind. We make sure that you can afford to make viable environmental decisions. So you can afford a place to live, which is near where you work. So you can have effective public transit that'll allow us to use public transit regularly and get off the 80% greenhouse gas emissions that our transportation is causing us. So yes, we have a plan. The buy-in is the affordability.
Thank you.
The climate emergency threatens the survival of human civilization. If anyone asks me, what would you pay so that your daughter has a livable world to the point that she's your age? There's nothing I wouldn't pay, there's nothing I wouldn't do. But fortunately, the reality is acting on the climate emergency as though we understand it's an emergency is not about costs, it's about avoiding costs. How much would we pay not to have lost Lytton in the matter of minutes? How much would we pay not to have lost 600 British Columbians in the heat dome this summer? What wouldn't we do to ensure our kids have a livable world? It happens to include canceling the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is costing Canadians $17 billion of our money for a pipeline that has no markets, that threatens our Salish Sea with a bitumen spill. What wouldn't we spend? What wouldn't we do to save our own lives?
Thank you. Dave Hilderman.
Canada could have stopped all their carbon dioxide emissions 30 years ago, and the impact to the climate right now would have been zero, absolutely none. Canada does not emit that much carbon dioxide. China and India together every 12 months increase their carbon dioxide emissions equivalent to all of Canada's. We can't save the world by destroying ourselves. It's going to make our children's much less prosperous than us. Think about it. If all of a sudden it costs 3 times as much for your energy, everything, it costs.
Thank you. David Busch.
Our plan was independently vetted and found to be as good or better than the Liberal plan while helping the Canadian economy. The money that is collected on the increased cost of fossil fuels is returned directly to the consumer, and they can use it for such things as local groceries, for transportation like electric bikes or bus passes, or for home energy retrofits, that all things that will immediately lower their emissions, as well as help them with the cost of living, because life is getting more expensive by the day and we can all use a little help, but we all have to turn around and decrease our emissions, and one step apiece winds up to one big step overall.
Thank you. And Doc Currie.
Normally stated, scientists and UN Secretary General have called this Code Red for Humanity. The third working group of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that capital lock-in is antithetical to meaningfully dealing with the climate crisis. Our party would nationalize the energy infrastructure, cancel Trans Mountain, pay reparations to Indigenous peoples for ecological damage, and transition all energy workers to work in the renewable energy sector. Thank you.
The trick, I think we all agree that the emergency is real and it is deeply, deeply concerning and urgent and requires an immediate response. The trick is how do you bring people along, and how do you make appropriate investments, and how are we accountable? I'll point to the Climate Accountability Act, which was monumental and gave us a pathway for the change, how the change can happen in terms of legislation and regulatory pathways for climate action to actually happen. There's no point in goals if you have no means of achieving them.
And this will be asked first to Sherri Moore-Arbour, second to David Busch for the full minute, then followed by Sabina Singh, Doc Currie, David Hilderman, and finally Elizabeth May. The question is, the recent frightening evidence, like the heat dome, which was totally unexpected this soon by many climate scientists, makes it clear that the climate crisis is fast evolving. If your party were to get a majority and form the next federal government, what would be the first 2 policies that you would implement to combat climate change? So essentially is, if your government were to get a majority and form the next federal government, what would be the first 2 policies that you would implement to combat climate change? And that David Busch, followed by Elizabeth May. No, that's not what I said, but sorry, the answer, it starts with David Busch, followed by Sheila. I'm sorry. You are going first, David Busch. Yeah. Followed by Sherri. Yeah. Can you repeat the question one more time, please? If your party were to get a majority and form the next federal government, what would be the first 2 policies that you would implement to combat climate change?
I wouldn't presume to speak for the party with regards to what are the first 2 bills that we'd put forward on that. I would say, though, our climate change plan is laid out quite well in our platform. We've got a number of pieces going forwards, not the least of which is we will be keeping the price on carbon. Call it a carbon tax, call it a hippopotamus. I don't care what you call it, but it will increase the cost of fossil fuels. But as I mentioned before, instead of turning around and having it go to the government and then down to government, it's going to go straight back to you, the consumer, to help you make decisions that are going to lower your emissions so that you can lower your footprint right away. And that is something we need to do because we need to take action immediately. The other big piece that I like about our plan, and I believe it makes it superior to all the others, is we're also looking internationally, because at the end of the day, we're but one player and we're in this together. The developing world, Africa and Asia especially, are increasing. They're using a lot of coal. We need to make disincentives for them to use the cheapest and dirtiest form of energy, and incentives to turn around and go with more cleaner, and there's my bell, so please look at our plan online.
Thank you. And it is Sherri Moore-Arbour is next.
Similarly, I wouldn't presume to hold the key to determining what the two top priorities would be in a robust and very detailed climate action plan that we've presented. And I will highlight that Mark Jackford from SFU had rated our plan 8 out of 10, and the highest rated of all of the climate action plans presented by the parties. There are two things that we need to do: address greenhouse gas emissions and invest in a green recovery, which is part of our economic recovery from COVID-19. We also need to continue to invest in helping people make the transitions off of fossil fuels and toward electrification, whether that's rebates for vehicles or tax credits for home renovations. There's an aspect of sort of bringing the individuals along, and business as well.
Thank you. Sabina,
Sorry, is this for a minute?
you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, I just want to be clear, if you vote for either the Liberals or Conservatives, you were voting for a pipeline that will transport dirty fuel to China. So, first thing we'll do is cancel the TMX pipeline. The second thing we'll do is cancel subsidies to oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Doc Currie.
The first thing I'll say is if that's a commitment that you're making, then that should really be in your platform, which it's not. The cancellation of the Trans Mountain is not in the NDP platform because doing so would aggrieve Rachel Notley, and this is a function of the ecological chauvinism that happens with the NDP. Just want to say briefly on why we would nationalize the energy sector, because it's an irrational organization of production exchange. The climate crisis is a capitalist crisis, just as the housing crisis is, just like all the other crises in our societies are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Hilderman.
We would spend resources to protect us from a changing climate. Australia's peak electric cost went from 10 cents a kilowatt hour to 55 cents a kilowatt hour during peak times. So most people don't even want to turn on the air conditioning when it's 30 degrees outside. Oil and gas extracted in Canada is done the most environmentally friendly in the whole world. We have the best rating for that. Anytime we stop doing that, the oil and gas gets purchased from other places and the earth is damaged more than if it's extracted in Canada.
And finally, Elizabeth May.
Tough in 30 seconds, but here we go. I would do what I've been arguing for in Parliament for years now. Treating the climate emergency like an emergency means structuring something like a wartime cabinet. You need to take every party in the House in the same room and work on it together. We need to do what the Biden administration has done, which is recognize the climate crisis can't be treated as an issue for the Minister of Environment alone. It needs to be seen as a national security issue with a whole of government response, and then you get serious.
Thank you. We have a final question, and this one is directed solely to the incumbent, Elizabeth May, and it's because of the demand that we just had for this question to be asked. So, Elizabeth, you have 1 minute to respond to this question. If you are elected and then become Speaker of the House, how will you ensure that the needs of your constituents are met?
Wow, what an incredible question, and I'm really glad you asked it, because last time after the last election, trial balloons were floated. What would happen? Because there were some suggestions that I might run for Speaker of the House, and I was trying to decide. And Martin Brown, who of course is a prominent political commentator, said the people of Saanich Gulf Islands did not elect Elizabeth May to run for Speaker of the House. And there should be some discussion. So this is the first chance I've had to discuss it. It's a super hypothetical question because first it would presume that I'm actually re-elected, which I don't take for granted at all. And secondly, I'd have to be elected Speaker by a secret ballot of all members of Parliament. Why would I do it? Because I think I could improve democracy in this country by improving the way Parliament functions, by ensuring the rules are followed, more respect, more civility, better decorum. Every speaker I've known has done a brilliant job looking after constituents because that's the job of every MP. So Peter Milliken or Andrew Scheer, you don't ignore your constituents, you do the work.
Thank you. So that ends the third segment, and so our final segment is in reverse order from our introductions, and each candidate has 1 minute to summarize their positions and how they stand on certain issues in conclusion. So I'll start with Sabina for your closing remarks.
Thank you. So in 2006, Jack Layton was the first MP in Parliament to put together the Climate Accountability Bill. And he built on the NDP's platform of social justice and environmental justice being interconnected. What I would like to do is join my team of island MPs who've been fighting for climate action in the government. I want to join Gord Johns, who's fighting for against plastic in the ocean, Alistair McGregor, who's fighting for about the tankers anchored off the islands, Randall Garrison, who is trying to save the habitat of the orcas, and Laurel Collins, who took the Climate Accountability Act and actually gave it some teeth, meaning that they have accountability goals for the next 10 years, which the original one did not have. So I want to join all my people fighting for Canada and to make it a better country to live in. Thank you.
I'm just going to say that respectfully, I'm actually I'm still processing the response to the speaker question because I think that while past speakers have absolutely served their constituents, they've done so with the support of robust party structures, and respectfully, that isn't the case for the Green Party any longer. There's an interesting paradox that isn't a part of the debates, but I think is very, very important. We in Saanich Gulf Islands absolutely prioritize the health and vitality of our environment and of the globe generally. And we've been lucky to have a very effective spokesperson as our MP, but we are at a point now where, in using parliamentary terms, debate has closed and action is needed. And the Liberal Party of Canada has the best plan for climate action, and if that's your priority, there is only one place you can vote.
It's a little awkward to have to rebut a closing argument from another of the candidates, but I will just say this. I'm very proud of what I've been able to accomplish over the last 10 years without, and for most of that time as the only Green MP, it wasn't a robust party structure. It was being able to work effectively across party lines by building strong relationships with others. Brought more money into Saanich Gulf Islands than the previous Conservative MP over the entire time, 14 years that he was the Member of Parliament. I believe that it's possible to keep doing good work and do the work in a minority parliament to drive climate action. Jagmeet Singh had the balance of power the last 2 years, and with all due respect to his candidate here today, he did nothing to advance climate action. With all due respect to our Liberal candidate, I would scrap Bill C-12 because it's still quite useless. It rejected carbon budgets. We need to be serious. I'm very committed to working hard for you and always listening to your advice. Thank you.
The reason that I'm running in this election is one reason, because about a year and a half ago, I discovered this. This is the sea level rise. This is the sea level record of Victoria going back 110 years. The sea level in Victoria has been rising at 0.76 millimeters per year for the last 110 years. I was shocked. I've lived my life trying to keep my carbon emissions minimal. I bought these cars with the best gas mileage. I've actually not gone on trips because I didn't want to fly, because we were told that flying a transatlantic flight is the same as driving a car for a year. I discovered that, and I discovered a lot of other things. I discovered that carbon dioxide, the study, this is based on satellite data from 1982 to 2015, the Earth has gained 18 million square kilometers of leaf cover, and 70% of that increased leaf cover is because carbon dioxide makes plants grow faster. That's equivalent to taking all the plants of the continental United States, multiplying that by 2 and adding that to the Earth. Why don't we hear that from the Green Party? If the Green Party had their way and we made carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere to drop down to 350 parts per million, all the greening would go away. It would brown. We don't hear this. These are facts about the Earth, and we don't hear this.
I talk to people on the street, and I explain my ideas, and they're very friendly, and they say, "Well, Doc, you sound very reasonable. These are all very reasonable ideas, but do I have to vote for the Communist Party to get this done?" And to me, it's not 1991 anymore. After 30 years of supposed liberal democratic capitalism triumphant, what have we had? Several illegal, totally bloody, unnecessary wars, major economic crisis, climate change, the pandemic, just wave after wave of catastrophe. And so I'm running for the Communist Party because I believe it is the only political line capable of meaningfully addressing all the many and overlapping crises in Canadian society today. And I hope that you will consider voting for me on that basis. Please check out our platform. Thank you.
24 days ago, the Taliban overran Afghanistan. For those of you who've served or have family members, my thanks. Other governments turned around and recalled Parliament for emergency sessions. Justin Trudeau dissolved Parliament and started an unnecessary election at the start of the fourth wave. We should not be here today, but we are, and so we have to proceed. I agree, action is needed. It's not the time anymore for empty promises, from promises to plant 2 billion trees, to promises to finding magically 7,500 doctors and nurses to help with our failing healthcare system. We need solid action. If you agree with Justin Trudeau, as I said, you have several choices to look for. If you agree instead that we need a change of course, we need a solid plan that's going to help us come out of the pandemic and get the country back on track, environmentally, fiscally, and socially, you have one choice, and that's Erin O'Toole, the Conservative Party of Canada, and David Busch, your local candidate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that includes the organized segment of tonight's forum. I just want to give the candidates a rousing hand of applause. If you missed anything or you want to share any of these segments with your friends, if you check out our website, you'll see that this event will be up on the website in the next couple of days. Voting day is September 20th. Advanced dates are 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. So in closing, the candidates have their tables at the back. We have the church venue until 9 o'clock, so you're welcome to stay to 9 o'clock if you wish to talk to your candidates. And we just ask that you avoid mingling in the hallway so people can safely exit. And finally, we want to thank you for your attendance tonight. And we have a donation box out there, as well as we have information on the North Saanich Residents Association, should you be a North Saanich resident and wish to join us. So I want to thank you for attending and making this a fun event. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done, Sean.
Thanks. Getting used to this stuff. It was only 2 years ago when we did it.
Yeah, well, hang on a second, a year from now it'll be